China has built massive quarantine camps as part of their zero COVID policy. And they're definitely thinking of the children. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. Before I begin, I just gotta say we could not make this show without support from viewers like you. All it takes is $1 per episode over on the crowdfunding website Patreon. We also have a Locals page. With a monthly subscription on Locals, you can help the show and get exclusive content. Links are below. So, China has a zero COVID policy. And while we all know the Chinese Communist Party has lied every step of the way about the coronavirus, the party does consider COVID a threat to the legitimacy of their rule. But because of extreme lockdown measures that often entails a lot of violence, and Chinese vaccines that don't really work so well, Chinese people are still pretty vulnerable to the virus, which means they're pretty vulnerable to the Communist Party's zero COVID policies, which is why I still call the coronavirus the CCP virus. And a new wave of the CCP virus is sweeping China. And it's causing some pretty absurd situations, like residents of Beijing not being allowed back into the city if they leave. Or that time one person in Shanghai Disneyland was diagnosed with the CCP virus, and they shut down the entire park, with everyone still inside it. But at least they were stuck in the happiest place on earth, where they got to watch fireworks while waiting for their nasal swabs. That's not a joke, that actually happened. Obviously, Chinese people aren't too happy with these lockdown policies. Here's a video of an elderly woman stuck in lockdown last year. There were also large-scale protests, like this one that happened when one province was letting people out, but the neighboring province wasn't letting people in. The Communist Party knows if it has to do another round of heavy-duty lockdowns, people are going to be pissed. That's why state-run media have been pushing the idea that maybe people who break epidemic prevention regulations and end up infecting the public should be executed. A Chinese lawyer told CCTV violating the epidemic prevention regulations constitutes a punishable crime that could warrant the death penalty. Now that's just a lawyer talking to state-run media, not the government actually announcing a policy, but still, I'm guessing people are pretty freaked out. Especially when China has been building, what shall I call them? Quarantine camps. And people were especially freaked out when authorities started sending kids there. More after the break. Welcome back. So China has been building massive quarantine camps, and it seems like they've been busy. Quarantine police have been going door to door arresting sick people. And the quarantine police don't really seem to care about what you were doing before they drag you away. Allegedly, this footage is from Heilongjiang province, where hundreds are being loaded up onto trains to be taken to quarantine camps. And the camps themselves seem to be maybe not the best places for medical help, but at least the food service seems great. And remember, folks, it's communism, so everyone has to pay their fair share.
5010块钱，进来这个隔离是21天，是5010块钱，包括住宿，包括吃。
But it got really bad when people started to notice kids being sent off to the quarantine camps. Allegedly, this footage is from Beijing, when primary school kids were hauled away at midnight without their parents because one kid at school tested positive. It looks like a lot of kids. Now, it's always hard to verify these videos since the Chinese Communist Party doesn't want footage like this leaking out to the public. But one thing we do know is when the party does something to children, that's when Chinese people get upset. In general, the Chinese people have made a kind of agreement with the Chinese Communist Party. They won't criticize the central government or the party in exchange for the chance to make money and improve their lives. But when it comes to kids, that agreement is off the table. Back in 2017, a prestigious private kindergarten was accused of sexually abusing children, and the Chinese internet erupted. Children in the class there were fed pills, jabbed with needles, and forced to strip naked. Geez, was that a kindergarten or a quarantine camp? The Communist Party tried to cover things up, keep things quiet, but parents weren't having it. Because when you do something to their one legally allowed kid, that's not going to go so well. Maybe now that they're allowed 3 kids, parents will feel like they have some to spare, but somehow, I don't think so. And somehow, I don't think carting off kids to quarantine camps without their parents is going to go over so well. And now, it's time for me to answer a question from a member of the China Uncensored 50 Cent Army, what I call the fans who support us in the fight against the CCP, on the crowdfunding websites Patreon and Locals. Today's question comes from Logan on Patreon. Got a history question. We all know the CCP likes talking about the fighting the Japanese during World War II. But did the nationalists suffer more than Mao and his gongfei? An excellent question, Logan. So yes, the Chinese Communist Party loves to talk about everything they did to fight off the Japanese in World War II, or as they call it, the war to resist Japanese aggression. The party immortalizes their efforts in the most schlocky, over-the-top, anti-Japanese propaganda TV shows and movies. But in the actual war, Mao's communist forces actually did mostly nothing. In fact, the Japanese invasion saved the Communist Party. Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist forces had almost eliminated the communists. Mao's numbers were devastated after the Long March, basically a forced retreat from Chiang's forces. But before Chiang could wipe Mao's forces out, the Japanese invaded, and he had to call a truce with Mao. And while the nationalist forces fought the Japanese, Mao's forces built up their numbers. In fact, of the approximately 40,000 skirmishes between Japanese and Chinese forces, just 200 were fought by the CCP, or 0.5%. In January 1940, Zhou Enlai sent a secret report to Joseph Stalin, which said that over 1 million Chinese had died fighting the Japanese through the summer of 1939. He further admitted that only 3% of those were CCP forces. According to the CCP's own estimates, it began the war with 30,000 troops. By Victory Day, it had 1.2 million regular troops and around 2.6 million to 3 million militia under its command. And once the war was over, Mao's hyped-up communist guerrilla army crushed Chiang's remaining forces. That's why Chiang had to flee to Taiwan, which the CCP has still vowed to conquer to this day. Thanks for your question and your support, Logan. And thank you to everyone who supports this show, whether it's as simple as liking, subscribing, and sharing this video, or supporting us on the crowdfunding websites Patreon, or the subscription platform Locals. You get different perks with each, so check them out. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.